Welcome back. What we're going to look at in this video is we're going to get the fire and the embers and the smoke. I'm also going to show you how to do the flickering lights. I've got a little bit of a reflection going on there, but if I get around this side of it and look back at it, you're going to get some reflection dealing with the camera, and I may have to go in and turn that down just a little bit. I've got a glow on the fire material, but basically what I'm looking to do here is I'm looking to create the effect of a warm fire. I want little embers. You can see the little, if I get a little closer to this thing, you'll see the little embers going up into the sky. And we're also going to deal with the smoke going up. So we have that all taken care of too. So let me show you, and then the last thing I've got in here is I got two lights that are set to flicker. So what we'll do is we'll go in and we'll take a look at those things and show you what's going on. Now, I need to show you parts of what we've got going on here because you're going to download those. First of all, you're going to download a log, and you're going to create the material that goes with the log. You can download both of those. They're all out either in Canvas or they're in the Google Drive. You're going to download a log. What you'll do is, once you've got one and you've got a texture, then you'll just put three of them together. And what I did was I put two of them side by side, flipped them over and rotated them a little bit, and then set one on top and kind of rotated it slightly so it was sitting on top of it. And then what I did was I also have a grate. So what I did with the grate was I just modeled this thing in a 3D program and brought it in and used actually the one I have at home here as an example of what these things look like. And then for this one, it's just a black texture. Now, I leave you to create that texture on your own. You don't really need anything more than that on it. You just need to have some sort of a black texture, and it's not particularly shiny. It's kind of a flat black, and it works pretty well. So I've stacked the three logs on top of that and got it all set up. There's also a picture that looks like this, and we're going to be talking about what this is and how this works. For creating fire, and you can find these things all over the web in various different setups, but we're going to be working with this one right here. We'll talk about what that is and how it works. We're going to be creating the material, and I'll talk about the material and how that works. In fact, right now while I'm here, let me turn that glow down just a little bit to take a little bit of that off that in the scene. We're going to be creating the material for the fire, and I'll show you how this is set up and how this works. We're also going to be looking at the embers. I've created the little tiny dot that comes up, jumps up in the air. We'll open that up and we'll see that. I've also got a smoke material that I've given you that you can download. It just looks like this little fuzz ball. If you want to do one of these yourself, you can. I had talked in an earlier video when we were talking about the fog that you can use the fog image for this as well. The only reason I didn't use the fog is I needed something that had a little bit more uneven edges, and that there's one negative aspect to that gradient exponential thing that turns a square image into a round fuzzball like this, is that it's uniform and it's a perfect circle. And I wanted something that's a little bit coarser than that, so I just went into Photoshop and just kind of took a white area and painted black or fuzzy black around it, and then added some gray areas in the middle. I just kind of made it look like it's a little puff of smoke, blurry puff of smoke, and got that all set up and ready to go. Embers I'm going to leave open there. And then I created this smoke material, and we'll talk about what that is. Let me get the fire material back up because I'm going to need to do that, which was right there. Okay, and we'll talk about that. And then the particle system, these are the particle systems right here. There are three of them. There's flames, there is embers, and then there is the smoke right here. So we'll call that one smoke. So we've got this one set up. And I've got these three things that are ready to go, and there they are, and they're working pretty well. You'll notice this does look different than it does when you actually get it in the scene. And that's because there's a lot of other elements going on right here. Sometimes the particle window is not the best place to see whether or not something is working correctly. That's why I almost always, when I'm creating a particle system, that I will put a copy of it in the scene, and then that way I can judge whether or not I'm getting what I want here. So I'm actually using this as the inspiration for how good it is looking, and then I come back over in here, and this is where I change the settings, but this is where I'm telling, in this particular case, for how well something is going to look. All right, so let's go back and look at the particle systems and see what we've got. Let me turn the first two off and do that. Let me talk about the material. All right. Now, the base material on this is pretty simple. It is the main material is set to be additive. This is not translucent. This is set to be additive. And the reason it is set to be additive is because I want, and I talked about this before, if a material is additive, that means every time you see material over material, and this is only set to be one-sided. So if I set this to be two-sided here momentarily, let's see if we can get the effect. If I put the two materials together, so if I look at this thing through from this side through to the other side, it should appear a little bit brighter where the two flames overlap. And that's kind of what I want in the real world. The more flame you have, the brighter it's going to be. And not just because it's bigger. In this particular case, the flame doesn't get any bigger. The flames stay the same size. But what happens is you'll notice if you look in the middle of this thing, how you really get the sense of it's way brighter in the middle than it is on the outside. And the reason that is happening is because this material is set to be additive. The more of the little pictures of flame that I have sitting in front of others, the brighter they get, which is the way flames behave. So this is set up for that. It's also set up to be unlit. And the reason that it is unlit, okay, and this is maybe something that I didn't explain well enough last time around. I know in the snow particles I talked about lit and unlit. And I kind of mentioned that particles can be lit two ways. That if it's a lit material, then it contains its own, that it's affected by the lights in the scene. If it's unlit, it's not affected by lights in the scene. And I think I need to explain a little bit more about what that actually means if you're expected to decide whether or not something is to be lit or unlit. These are little two-dimensional cards, and I've mentioned that before. That this is a two-dimensional card that has a picture of a flame on it. So if I have lights in my scene and my material is set to be lit, like let's say I have a wall terrain or a wall texture, and I have lights in my scene and I want the lights to shine on the wall. If the material is a lit material, that means that it is affected by the lighting in the scene. So if I have a room and I've got textures on the wall and I have a light in the room, then I expect the wall to be lit up by that light. I don't expect the wall to be lit on its own or to have its own inner light, because it destroys the effect I'm trying to go for. If I want the room to be moody, I want the lights to be relatively dim, and I don't want the wall to be bright like it's glowing. So that's the difference between a lit material and an unlit material. A lit material, which sounds the opposite. A lit material means it is being lit by lights in the scene. An unlit material means it has its own interior lighting. So in the case of fire here, when I set this to be unlit, what I'm saying is I don't want lights in the scene to affect it. I don't want the light to be brighter if I happen to shine a flashlight on it. I don't want a light to be brighter if I put a candle next to it or if I put a light bulb next to it. That shouldn't have any effect at all on how bright the fire looks. So by setting this material to be unlit, what I'm saying is it's additive and it's unlit. It basically creates its own lighting. The other thing that would happen on this one was if I set this to be lit, if I put a light bulb down, say, inside of the fire, it would cast shadows on the ground because it's receiving light and then it's therefore casting shadows. So I don't want that at all. So that's why this is an unlit material. It's also set to be additive and emissive, which means that all of the brightness, all of the color is coming through emissive color, and it's starting to glow in and of itself. If I had plugged those into base color, I would have very flat pictures of fire, and I want them to have the ability to combine themselves together to become brighter. The more flames you have, the more of these little cards that you see, the brighter the flames are going to be. So that's why it's set up that way. I've also added in a little bit of a multiplier. I've multiplied it by 3. What I was looking for was something that's just a little bit brighter than normal. And you can do that depending upon what you're doing. A birthday candle doesn't really get intensely bright. A large fire can be intensely bright down at the core of it. That's why I have that extra material built in. I've also got, once again, a vertex color. This is standard when you're dealing with a particle system. Your materials almost always contain a vertex color. It does give me the ability to change the color later on, which I'm going to be doing. I am going to be changing colors in here because as I'm working through this thing, the embers are going to start out glowing and then die out, and so is the fire, the cloud, the smoke is going to do the same thing. So I want to make sure that that's all taken care of. So that's in there, and that's standard. So that is my flame material. Let's say that. Okay. Now, my embers material, I'm going to come back to that when I actually do the embers in the particle system. The same thing with the smoke. We'll come back and we'll look at those things individually as we go. Let's go back and look at the particle system now and see what it is that I have set up in here that I'm doing. Okay, so you'll notice that there aren't any GPU sprites in here. And the reason that there aren't any GPU sprites in here is because I don't really have, this is a different type of a particle. This isn't a standard particle. This is creating something that is made up of 16 individual pictures. And it's called a sub-UV material. And I mentioned sub-UV when we first looked at particle systems. I mentioned that we were going to be talking about sub-UVs and how we use them when we come to flames. And this is kind of what we have. When you're dealing with the flame material, which if I come to the flame texture, if I come back over here and track that down and double click on it, and I'll bring it up. All right. This was created in Photoshop, and you can Google and find these flip cards, flame flip cards, or you can Google sub-UV images, and you can come up with all kinds of them. Basically, what we do is rather than substitute 16 different pictures, what I can do is I can go in and create an image in Photoshop that has 16 individual or 32 or 64 or 4 or whatever number you want. It's going to be a power of 4 and 2, excuse me. However many pictures that you want. I have 16 pictures of random pictures of a flame. And what I'm looking for is I want realistic flame, and I want them to look like they're flickering. So what happens is that a sub-UV material like this, or texture like this, is basically has it's like an array, and I've got a grid set up. I've got 4 pictures across. I've got 4 pictures down. And what Unreal is going to do is it's going to go in and look at this quadrant and then look at this quadrant, and it's going to display these images one at a time. And I can either do it randomly, so it just randomly picks them, or I can have them cycle through it in case I needed to have it actually cycle through. I might feel that works best. I can also set it up to where it cycles through once and then becomes random. When we start working with audio, you'll see how that works. When we start dealing with things like maybe footsteps, you'll do the sequence first and then it will start doing random, or it'll do random to begin with, or it'll just go 1 through 16, 1 through 16, 1 through 16 over and over and over again. So the images look like this, and like I said, if you find these, you'll find them either with 16 or 4, 16 or 32, and you can download them. They have transparency built into them. They have to be a Targa or a PNG file. This one happens to be, doesn't say up there what it is, but I think this one was a Targa file. So it has opacity because you don't want any of the background. I just want the flames. I don't want to see any background. That's why I can see the grid back there. The checkerboard, but that's the way that thing is set up. And then what we do is we bring it in and we turn it into a material, so that the flame material actually had that as a picture in there, and then it's set up as an image with 16 sub-images. And then when I come in here to my fire system, what I do is under my required, I add the fire flame into that. Okay. Now, I've got the camera is facing the position. I can go in and set that to square. It doesn't really change much on this one. I'll do the same thing on this. I'll send that back to none. I've got my flame is coming up like this. And then I'm dealing with an unlimited amount of emitter loops. I want it to continuously spawn those things. If I set that to 1, it'll give me a burst and then stop, and then give me a burst and then stop. So it's set to an unlimited amount, so I have my flames are flickering and doing what they need to do. Okay. Then underneath this, you have a section called sub-UV. And this is where you call up and tell Unreal that you have an image that's made up of sub-images. And so you can go in and you can tell it how you want it to happen. The interpolation blend, I can do none, I can do linear, linear blend, random, or random blend. And what that does is it either will, a blend will morph from one image to the other, which takes more memory. But if you do linear, it's just going to start at the beginning and it's going to go all the way through to the end, and then start back at the beginning again. But it's going to flash the individual pictures. And I don't think you'll see much of a difference if I go in here and click this. You're really not going to see much of a difference. It makes it adds a little blurriness to it when you have the blend on there. It's apparently not enough to see, so I'm not going to worry too much about it. But I have it set to random. It's now randomly picking out one of those 16 images and displaying them one at a time. Or you can do it linear. It'll start at the beginning and run to the end. And you can set it up either way. Then you tell it how many images, horizontal and vertical, you have. So if you've got 32 and it's 8 rows of 8 would be 64, or 4 rows of 4 is 16. However many of those images that you have, you just type in the number of images across and down. Remember, powers of 2 can also be rectangular. So you might go in and create an image that has 8 sub-images and it's 2 rows of 4 each. So I would just go in there and say it's 4 images across and it's 2 images deep, and it'll figure out and display those things accurately from there. So this is really kind of a nice way of actually getting a real flame. I don't have to go in and paint something. I think painting flames, and some people like painting flames, I think it looks too forced. It doesn't look real. I like actually using real photographs of flame. You go in and do that, and if you can take if you have access to Photoshop, again, you can bring in a little video clip of a flame, and then you can isolate a sequence of flames, and then you can create your own in there. Or like I said, you can Google sub-UV flames, and you'll find all kinds of these things, and you can pick them up and use them. Some illustrated, some painted, some photographs like this one. Then we'll look at the spawn. I'm spawning 25 particles. And I'm not changing anything else in here. I'm just spawning out 25 of them. If you want less flames, then obviously you would just go in and lower that down, and you're going to get less of them. It's artistically, this is sort of up to you as to what you want. If I do 100, you can see that thing is glowing. It depends on what you're burning. If you're burning, maybe a little object like this, then I've got 2 of these particles going. I'm going to need to go back, and I'm going to need to change a lot of things around here because of the way that those things are spawning. That's not the way flames work. So it's kind of set to be the best right here, where I have a whole group of them, and they move up and they die out, and it's all set up along the same way. So your spawning is going to affect everything else that you do. That's one of the reasons why spawn is in here really first. That's really the first set of changes you can make to something, is because everything depends and everything changes based off of how many objects you have spawning. So if you're looking to have 25 flames spawn, which is a pretty good amount, then everything you do from here on in is going to change the way that works. And there are a lot of things that are going on in here that are changing the overall shape of that flame. The way that they taper off, the way that they flicker up at the end, that's all being handled based off of the number I created to begin with for spawning. The lifetime. The lifetime on these things, they're all under the length of 1. So some of these are 0.35, some of these are 0.85. If I go back and say, let's make that 0.85, so they're all exactly the same, then I don't get a lot of variation in there. If I make that too small, then I get too much of a gap in through here. So I kind of like that 0.35 to 0.85. It gives me a nice feel, a nice fill, and gives me a nice overall look on that one. The initial size, that again is being determined by what works best for the number of items that you have spawning. So these are set to maximum size of 20 and a minimum size of 15. And again, the Z size doesn't really matter because these are all being put onto two-dimensional cards. You can't really see them anyway. So I can set my Z's to 0, or I can put whatever number in there. It doesn't really matter. It's not going to change anything at all. My initial velocity. All right. So what I'm doing on this one is like my rain, like my snow. I need the particles going in more than just one direction. I'm looking to have the flames spread out a little bit, and they are coming back together at the top up there, and we'll talk more about the size by life and things like that. But that I'm looking for width at the base of the fire. So I have my flames going in two directions. They're going a maximum of 16 by 16, so they're going to the right, X and Y, they're spreading out 16 units, and then the minimum they're spreading out to the left at minus 16X and minus 16Y. So that's giving me a base of flames, okay, that's roughly 32 units by 32 units. So I'm getting a nice square base for my flames. Then the Z is what's controlling the upward motion. So if it's a positive number, it is upwards. If it's a negative number, it is downwards. And I want my flames going up. So some of them are going up at a speed of 200. Some of them are going up at a speed of 125. The whole point of this is that I've got a wide variety of flames flickering up, and they're all moving at different speeds, which is kind of the perfect setup for that. Now my sub image index, this is, you don't have to do anything with this in here. All you need to do is put it in. Okay, and what it's doing is it has some setups already in here. You don't really have to do anything. I've got a beginning and I have an end. I'm just going to close that up and tell you that you need to put this in here for the sub image to work correctly, but you're not going to make any changes to that at all. And that's the only one I've got in here because I don't have, the other ones don't have sub UV images. So I can do it that way. And if I wanted my embers to have different shapes, I can kind of do the same thing. I can go in, and this is something to remember when you're doing this, is that this whole sub image, sub UV thing can come in handy when you're doing stuff like smoke or doing stuff like embers. Maybe I don't want my embers to all be perfect little round circles. Maybe I want them to all have a different shape. Well, I can do the same thing. I can use a sub UV image in here. I would turn off sprites and use a sub UV image, and I can pick from one of 16 different little round shapes to have my embers look like that. Or my smoke, I can go in and rather than use a single smoke image, I can have 16 variations in that, all in one image, and really give myself some nice variation on that. So sub UVs can come in really handy when you're doing a variety of things. Rotation, flames rotate. That's what I'm not spawning them and just rising them up. They need to look like they're kind of boiling down there, which is the effect that I've got going. So I've got about a 0.5 setting on the maximum rotation. So they are, some of them aren't, some of them are just moving up, but most of them are, or half of them are spinning at a speed of up to 0.5, and it just kind of fills in nicely. You can play with those numbers and look and see what they do, but this works really nicely for what I've got going. Size by life. This is an important one because I need the flames to die out as the flames go up. I don't want the particles to stay the size that they are until they reach the very top and then vanish off the screen. Flames get smaller as they come up, and they flicker out, and they do those that have that appearance. So that's in essence what I have set up in here. So much like we did when we were working with the particle system before, when we were doing the rain and the fog and those kinds of things, and I had different elements set up. This one I've got, or I guess it was the rain splash that had those. This is doing the same basic thing. It starts out at a size of 3 at its birth. So as these things are created down here, at the point 0 is the birth, the 0 timeline. And then about 3/4 of the way through, they are starting to shrink a little bit. So they start big, and then they start about 3/4 of their life, they start to shrink out. And then over the last quarter of their life, the last 0.25 of their life, they shrink out to nothing. Now, that sort of gives you this nice little pointed look. If I went in and changed this maybe to 0.5, okay, then I get a little bit more of a, it's a little bit more of a shape, of the true shape of a triangle like this. By going in and giving this a little bit more of a, it's more than halfway through its life, it's staying wider in through here up till about there. So rather than tapering all the way off to its death, I've got a little bit more width on the body of my flames. And that's important because the flames have to overlap 3 logs. What I don't want to have look like is I don't want it to look like these flames are tapering down to the point where the log looks like the flames are just coming out of the middle of the log and there's really nothing coming through underneath it. I kind of want a little bit of that feel coming out over here. And if this is too much of a straight taper, then you don't really get that sense that the flames are flickering around this log, which is kind of what I want. So I do that by using this as a way of saying, look, I want the width of this to be like this, and then the size of it, and then I want the size to be by 3/4. I want them still to have the same size, and so they maintain this little square around in through here, and then they taper out. And you can add multiple things in here if you wanted to control that, but 3 of them works pretty good. I've got the beginning, I have the end, and then I have a point that's in between that allows me to maintain that. All right, then we have an initial color. Now, in this particular case, the initial color, I'm not really doing anything with it. I'm going to be doing something with them elsewhere. But what I've done is I just went in and set this to a yellow. And remember, I have a vertex color in there, which allows me to add color to the particles in through here. So I'm adding I just picked a random, light yellow to go with it to kind of add a little bit of color to the particles. The particles look a little washed out. I'm making them glow a little bit. This just kind of makes that glow a little bit more yellowy, which is what you're seeing around here. So this is adding into this yellow glow, and I'm not getting a white glow, which I would get if that color was white by default. And then the last thing down over here is the location. That is a cylinder, and I've set it to seed. And basically what I've got is I've got a cylinder that is 25 units around. If I turn that on, I think it'll let me see it. Yeah, you can see it there. That's my little cylinder. At the very bottom, you've got a little checkbox down here, and you can click to see exactly where that cylinder is, and you can say, see what's happening is the particles are being formed within that circular. So think of it as, excuse me, the particles will spawn on this outer surface and then clear to the inside. They don't really spawn outside of it. So I'm containing, the flames are being contained to this particular shape. And what you'll do is when you're trying to do something like this, you'll obviously, this is why you want to have that in your scene, so you can sit and look and go, okay, those flames need to be bigger. If I said, and you can't see it, but I'm doing it over here. If I went in and said, look, I'd like to have those flames maybe be a little bit bigger, I can hit 35, and now they come up around the outside a little bit more. It's engulfing the wood just a little bit more. So I can get those things set up that way and leave it at that. And so I can control how much of the wood I'm getting. Now, if I wanted flames to cover the entire thing, maybe what I would do is I would put 2 or 3 particles in there and have them sort of, working at different speeds and at different amounts. And they can be considerably smaller at that point. But I'm just trying to give the sense of flames coming around that thing. So I'll change that to 0.35 and leave it there and then do it that way. The height of this one is set to 10. Obviously, if I set this to 50, what it does is it just creates a much more cylindrical shape to this thing. If I set that down to 1, it's a much smaller shape, and it's really not changing too much that you see over here. It's really where they're being formed at the base. And I have found that the 10 setting in there works the best for this because kind of what it does is it creates more particles are being spawned more in a bigger shape there. So what I get is with that cylinder, if I go back and turn that cylinder back on, okay, it's set to 10. What's happening is they're spawning anywhere on there. So I've kind of got, some of them are spawning up here, some of them are spawning down there, and I get a much deeper, I think, or a much fuller base of flames being spawned there. So that's why we have that thing set on. So that's my fire system. Turn that off. And let's turn on the embers now. And we'll see kind of what's going on there. And you can see little dots, these little dots rising up. They're all different sizes, and they're just kind of moving up. Because what embers are supposed to be are little pieces of wood that are letting go. The little embers of the wood are they're light, they're being caught in the upward draft of the flames, and they're being pulled up, and then they blink out. They burn up, and the light goes out on them, and I have control over how many are being spawned, where they're being spawned, the color that they are. It's hard to see that right there, but the color that they are, and then how quickly they die out and swirl around and do those kinds of things. Now, here's the material. Let's look at the material here really quickly on this one. And again, the handout walks through this and tells you exactly how to make this. I'm just trying to do a visual representation of what's going on here. Okay, and this is set up pretty much like the other materials were. Except what I'm doing with this one is I'm not actually dealing with an ember shape. I'm letting this radiant gradient or radial gradient exponential, that's hard to say 3 times really fast, is dealing with the roundness. I just created a color. I used a constant 3. I changed the color to be this kind of this yellowish ember, and I could, you know, go in and make that maybe a little bit brighter. A little more vibrant yellow if I wanted to, and it'll change that. You're not really going to see much. There's that particle right there, and this is what the gradient's doing. Now here's what I have going on with this one. I do have the radius set to be fairly small. It's set to 0.25. That's what's doing that, and I have the density set to 2. And I'm controlling that here because the density is a little hard to control in a particle system. The radius I can shrink it up. But what the radius is doing in here is it's giving this little fuzzy edge, which is kind of what I'm looking for. I like that fuzzy edge with the density on it, so I'm going to control that in through here. There's the vertex color, so I can change that in the world, and I'm going to be doing that. And then I've got a multiplier set to 5. This is actually glowing. These little embers I want to glow, so that's why this is set to 5. If you're not sure about something glowing, and by the way, this is set up the same way, it's unlit, it's additive. If you're not sure about glowing, anything higher than 3, a value of 3 in emissive is going to glow. 1 or 2 might give you a little bit of the appearance that it's glowing, but in the game level, it's not going to do it. If you go 3 or higher, then it's going to start to give you that little glow out around there, which these little embers are going to have, especially when you start getting them in the smoke. They really have this nice little glow effect around them, so that's really kind of nice. So other than that, it's not much different from the other material that we just did. All right, so what are we doing on this one? All right, so this one is GPU sprites. Not a lot of particles going on there, but again, I might as well use them if at all possible. I believe GPU doesn't work on sub-UV. That's why it's not in here at all, because it's a sub-UV effect. Okay, so this has got the GPU sprites on it, and we're set there. Required, I've added my embers material into there, so I've got it. I've got facing camera position. These can be square, and this can be none. It doesn't really matter. They're still going to be facing me no matter what I do, so I'm just going to go ahead and set those back to that. And again, the emitter loops is set to 0, so it's a constant stream of particles coming up out of there. That's kind of what I'm looking for. Okay, my spawn is a very low number. If you're watching a campfire, if you've ever stared into a campfire, not a lot of these things come up. In fact, this probably is an exaggeration. But for the purposes of doing something like this, I'll exaggerate it a little bit. Those are 2 particles coming up. That means every frame, 2 particles are emitting. It doesn't mean 2 total. It means 2 every tick of the game. So it gives me this nice steady 1. If you wanted to lower that to 1, that would work too. You don't really get a lot of embers coming up. It kind of depends upon the wood and how roaring the fire is and things like that. And again, remember, you need to start observing these things in life so you can come back and add those elements in there. The lifetime is controlling how high they are going before they start to die out. So the speed on these, minimum is 3, maximum is 5. So they're on the screen for 5 or 3 to 5, and then they die out. This is because they're moving very slowly, because they're being caught in the upward draft, so they're not really getting a lot of speed coming up out of there. That the longer The life means that it's a slower speed. A faster speed means these would have to have a shorter life, otherwise they'd shoot, 100 feet, 200 feet into the sky, and most embers don't make it much more than a couple of feet above the flames. So that's, again, a bit of an exaggeration, but you can see, you just want to see how they work. The initial size I've got in here, 10, 10, and 25, because, again, these particles have no Z. I can go in and set my Z to 0. It doesn't really matter. Some of the particles are 10, some of them are 5, and then everything in between. And so that works pretty well for what we're doing as well. The initial velocity, you almost always want to spread. I don't want these things being fired up in a straight line. So my maximum is going to go out 10 units on the X and 10 units on the Y. And then they're also going to go out minus 10 and minus on both the X and the Y. And so what we get is this pattern, this cone. I suppose if I was to track every one of these things, basically what I have going on here is they're all stemming from a single particle down below. Actually, they're from I've got another one of those cylinders down here. But normally they're coming out of a single point, and then they would be a cone rising up out of the base of this thing. And that's what these two sets of numbers are doing. A cone is the right side of the cone up here, the left side of the cone down over there. And then the speed is 150 and 100. It's not very fast. It's just they're kind of just drifting upwards, and you can set those up to be pretty much any way you want them to be. Initial color. Now, initial color on this one I have set to be vector constant. So it's giving me an area, and it's giving me a constant color, and I just went in and said, look, make those things kind of like that golden, that yellow, orange golden color, and it's adding that into the color that they already are. Let's leave that where it is. It's adding that into the color that they already are, so we're getting a little bit of that effect going on. If you wanted to, on your initial color, well, I'm going to do an size by life, so we'll talk about that. So there's my initial color. That's the color that they're going to start out at, and I just added that in to give it a little bit of believability. My initial rotation, I'm rotating them. You can't really see that, but they are kind of tumbling as they go up. My size by life. Now I'm controlling these without a third point. I just basically have a beginning or a birth and an end. So what these things are doing is they are spawning out at their set size, and their initial size in here was either somewhere between 5 and 10. So they are spawning at a point somewhere between 5 and 10. And then over the course of their life, which was, I think, what, 3 to 5 seconds? Over 3 to 5 seconds, they basically just start shrinking down to 0. So they start out at a size of 1 on the X and Y, and they end up at a size of 0, and basically it just makes them appear like they fade out as they go up. I'm not really dealing with any opacity. They don't really need to be opaque. They just need to look like they blink out, which is kind of what embers do. So that's the way I have them set up. And then the last thing is I have that same cylinder seed. Remember, if you hold down Shift and left click and drag, you will duplicate. I don't need 2 of them in there. You'll duplicate it, and that's the exact same settings, which is what I wanted. This one and this one have the exact same settings. It's a little cylinder down here that's emitting those things. Those particles are coming out of it. If I turn this thing back on down here so you can see it, you can see they're coming somewhere out of the middle of that cylinder. And again, they should be coming up out of the wood. So, and the wood is being engulfed by the fire, and the fire is set to that same cylinder. So those particles are looking. I don't have a particle, basically one of these embers, coming up out of the end of a log where there's no fire. It's just coming out of the same place as the fire. So that's why I have it set up the same way. And that gives us those two things together. And again, you should just see those just sort of moving up the top. The last one over here is smoke. All right, now smoke is a tricky thing to deal with. It's tricky because of the behavior of smoke. Smoke particles, or smoke itself, doesn't exist in real life. An ember is a little teeny tiny object that comes up out of a flame. A flame, or a burning log. A flame has a specific size and a specific shape, although it may be random. Smoke doesn't have a uniform shape at any time. it just looks like a completely, cloud-like existence where they come and go, and they don't really have any really set size or shape. It can be wispy like a cigarette. It can be like the cloud or the smoke coming up off of a log. Can be completely different. A house is going to burn differently than a fireplace, than a barbecue, than a cigarette, than a birthday candle that you blow out. They're all going to smoke differently. So we have to kind of come up with something that looks kind of generic. And it gets a little bit tricky when we start getting into its lifetime. How far up in the sky is it supposed to go? How high up do I want that smoke to go before it vanishes? On a dark night, it's going to be gone fairly quickly. In the daytime, it's going to be visible for miles, maybe, depending upon what it is. So those are all of the things that I kind of have to take into consideration. I've turned everything off here except the smoke. That's why it looks like that. But those are all the things that I have to take into consideration as I'm figuring out how the smoke works. The smoke should be brighter at the base because it's picking up the light. The light from the fire is glowing within the smoke. And then as the smoke moves up, I can't look up because if you look up and it goes away, then you can't see it anymore. But if you look up like that, then it's fading out. It's not being affected by the light as much. So smoke is a kind of a tricky thing to do, and the recipe I'm going to give you here for the smoke is a really good one, and I think will work in a variety of instances, and is done in such a way that it makes sense when you have to come back and tweak it for a different usage. And remember, once you've created a smoke, you can pick it up and use it again and again and again, or you can make a copy of it and then just go in and tweak the settings on it, so then you have multiple types of smoke and you can come back and work with it. So it's not like you have to reinvent the wheel every time. You can keep using the same smoke over and over again if it works best for you. It depends on what you want to do. So we'll look at this thing. Again, it's GPU sprites because I'm generating a lot of them. My required, it has the smoke material in there. I'm also going to set that to square and none again in here, so they kind of go up like that. And I think that might help me if I come back over here and look up. But they still vanish if you look up like that, and that's another issue altogether. Okay, so my required, I've got that in here, and that has been set. Again, my emitter loops is 0, which is infinite. I want that to continue to smoke. The lifetime, they're a little bit longer than the flames. But remember, that's solely dependent upon the speed and the size of the particle, or if you're doing size over life or things like that, that's going to have bearing on that one. So kind of keep that in mind. If I set this to be higher, 4 and 8, say, the smoke is going to be on the screen longer. So I can look up and see that. You have to be able to see particles. If you're not looking at the emitter, the particle goes away, which is kind of a bummer, but it's something we just have to live with. All right, so the lifetime is 3 and 6 on that. The initial size, it depends upon the material that you've got in here. It depends on what you're trying to do. I set this to between 85 and 100. The initial size is fairly large because I've got these big things of smoke, and it needs to look like it's coming over the sides of the fire. The smoke is going to come forward and sideways a little bit more than the flames will be, actually. The smoke, because the smoke will kind of come out from underneath it. You're going to get smoke coming down and underneath and coming forward, all kinds of things to take into account on that. So basically the size is big enough for me to encompass that and take that into account. My initial velocity is fairly slow. I've got some going at 100, some of them going as slow as 25. What this does, this minimum, when you set the speed with a top end and a low end, remember, because I'm spawning the number of particles that I'm spawning here, okay, I'm spawning 35 particles. Okay, what they're doing is they're all spawning right here and moving up, and then what's happening is they're dying out between 3 and 6 seconds into the animation. But because I've got the minimum set to 25 for the speed, that means there's a lot of them in this grouping in through here. All of them are being spawning, and some of them are moving faster, and most of them are, some of them are moving slower in through here, and you end up with more smoke in this area. If I went back and said, let's make this maybe 60, then you see I'm going to get this thicker smoke up to right about here. It's staying pretty much constant up to right about there. And if I come back and said make this like 5, Okay, I'd get a much brighter section down here, and I'm going to get more wispiness going up there because the bulk of them are living and dying right in this area. So keep that in mind when you're doing this, that's kind of what's happening. When you're setting that amount, you are telling it, I want some of them to live all the way up to here, but I also want a whole grouping of them generally to stay within the first quarter of the life of those things. So I've got them set that way. Color over life, I'm not doing anything. I don't believe I'm doing anything here. Did I do something in there? Yes, I did. All right. What's happening is I'm starting the color out kind of with this peachy color. It's kind of a peachy gray, and it's going to a more dull gray at the end. So basically what I've done here in color over life is all I've done is I've opened this all the way up. Distribution opens up the constant curve, which opens up to points, and then I have 0.0 and 0.1. In value is the time in which it starts. In value for number 1 is the time in which it dies. Whether it's 6 seconds, whether it's 3 seconds, whether it's a minute and a half. This represents the birth, this represents the death on that timeline. So they spawn, they are this color, and as they age, they start to gray out. In fact, I might even go in and make that a little more of a base gray. So they're going to start out with this kind of a cream color, and then they're going to turn gray as they go up. Now, it's against a black background. You really have to look at that in terms of how it looks in your scene, because it might be, you might want to have that smoke blend a little bit more or a little bit less depending upon what you have going on for scene out there. This one also has alpha over life. What is alpha over life? Alpha is transparency. Let me open these all the way up because I've got 3 of them in here. Okay. When you're setting alpha, you think of things along the lines of basically you're dealing with white and black. White is visible, black is transparent. So what I've done in here is I've set up 3 points in its life. 2 of them are very close together. The 0 and the 0.1. So the in value for 0.0 is 0 or its birth right here. So at the beginning of it, it is set to have a specific value of color, which is right there. Okay. Then within 1/10 of its life right there, what I'm saying is I want to go in and I want to make that about 50% transparent. So I've set a value on this one of 0.5, which means it's 50% see-through. Okay. Then what I'm saying down here at the bottom is at the 3rd point of its life, or at the end of its life, I want it to be completely transparent. So as you're looking up on this thing, okay, those are actually coming up to about here, but they're dying out and getting wispy up at the very end of its life. And this is what, you don't want to see smoke that goes up, goes up, goes up, and then poof, just vanishes. It should kind of peter out. And that's what these do. Sometimes they stay clumped together and stay attached. Sometimes there's a break and a little grouping of them kind of fade out afterwards. You're just kind of going for a real natural, a slow, oozing, natural look of the smoke particles coming up like that. And it's open for interpretation. Like I said, what I'm giving you is a good basis for about any kind of smoke that you're going to want. Maybe you want them to be on the screen longer. Maybe you want them to have a different color. Maybe you want them to be bigger. But you can go in and start massaging all of these numbers and just staying, if I take the size up, maybe then I need to go in and play with these numbers so that the speed is different, so that the transition from completely opaque to transparent is different along that sliding scale until I get it perfect. Then I have an initial rotation on this one. These things are tumbling slightly, and I don't want it to look like they're spinning, so it's a very slight tumble, maximum of 0.1. We're just getting a little bit of that tumbling action going up, and you can see, if you go in and look at that, you can actually see these things are kind of rumbling as they're tumbling as they go up like that, which is kind of what we want. It gives you that nice finishing feel as these kind of work themselves out. It's almost like the more they move, the more they break themselves up, which is the way smoke looks. And then initial rotation rate, I have the initial rotation rate in there. It is spinning to start. It's not building up. Now, 0.1 is not much of a tumble. And this might be considered overkill, and we might run across somebody who does one of these smoke things and says, hey, your initial rotation rate, you're not rotating it that much. So if it takes a couple of seconds for the things to start tumbling, well, within a couple of seconds they're up about here, and that's going to be okay for tumbling. I just feel like it should be tumbling from the minute that the smoke spawns. It needs to look like you've walked into a room and you just opened up your eyes. The smoke is not starting when you open up your eyes. The smoke was going up before you walked in the room. So I don't want to have any kind of a delay for my initial rotation. I want it to be tumbling right away, not to start static and then start tumbling as it goes up. Initial rotation is going to do that. It's going to start a rotation. What initial rotation says is, look, rather than start it uniform and straight, start it at some form of already being rotated and then go from there. So those are the three things that I've got. When you add them all together, it makes this really nice system. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. They give this really nice system, and I've got smoke that's going up and tapering up into the sky. I've got a little bit of a glow. And then the last thing I need to show you is what those lights are and how those lights are working. Because I needed lights that flickered to make it look like there was a fire going on in that thing, and you can kind of see what those lights are doing down here on the ground. Now there are two lights that are in here. There's actually a light down in the bottom, down here, underneath that thing. There's one down here that's giving me the lighting underneath, and then there's one up here that's giving me more lighting out and around. And those two things are working in conjunction together. And let me show you what's happening in terms of the flickering of the light and how those things work. When you put a light in the scene, okay, and this was, I think, 0.2 is that one up there. The light 2 is that one. Light 1 is the one on the bottom. I'll use the one up here on the top. By the way, when you're working with particles, remember there are a bunch of little particle cards that are rising up out of here. If I go back and select my particle fire, see this little thing that's going up like that? This is where all the particles are for that smoke. At its widest point, the smoke is the widest point in there. If I'm trying to click on that light, I can't click on the light because it keeps trying to select the fire. All right, so you're going to have to use your list over here to go in and select things. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to select it if it's in the middle of a particle system like that. So I've got that. Now, if I scroll down on my light over here, what you're going to see is you're going to see a thing that says light function. And what a light function is basically an animated material that goes on the light. And in this particular case, the animated material that I want on there is I want it to flicker. Right? So how do I do that? How do I get it set up? It works like this. It's all math. And you can see that thing flickering right there. All right. Basically, what we have is I started out with a time, and you can right-click and just type in time, and you'll get one of these things down and through here. And there's not much of a thing that you can do on that because it's really everything else that you see here. But what that time does is the time is going to give me a standard by which I can do things with. Okay. Now, if I want to open these things up so you can see them, if they'll actually work, so we can see what's going on. Sometimes there's nothing there that I can show you. No, not really. All right. So this is the standard flicker. So we have a time. I am multiplying that by a number here. If I change that number, I can make things flicker faster. So I don't really need this one. Here's what's actually functioning. Let me pull these two things down, and we'll wire that directly into that. Okay. What is happening is there's my sine. And the sine, and this is a fractal. Okay. So what a fractal is doing is it's just basically making the sine flash. And if I click on the sine, I have a setting in here. I can make it slow by raising the number, or I can make it faster by lowering the number. Now you'll notice it starts to look uniform. the slower or the lower the number, the more uniform this thing starts to look. So, and that's because you can only handle so much flashing, and I almost can't even look at it without feeling it's going to set off a seizure. But that it's a uniform flashing that is going on, and flames aren't uniform. If I save that up here and go back and look at it, that's not really what I wanted to do. Okay. It's starting to look repetitious. And I'm looking for something a little bit more random than that. That's what this multiplier is doing down over here. What that multiplier is doing is it's disrupting that and causing it to flash a little bit more random. Let me put that back to 1. And we're starting to get a little bit of randomness to it. And I can take that and maybe I'll up that to 3. So it goes a little bit faster like that. That works pretty good. And what you can do is, if you're looking for like complete randomization, you can go in and do another multiply. So since the sine is handling that and it's going into the fractal, pull this down and wire that over. You see the sine is just flashing. And what the fractal is doing is the fractal is breaking that up. Okay. So what I can do is, if I wanted to get some really good flashing going on, I can go in and maybe take these two things and duplicate them and bring them down. And I'll take this and bring that down. And I'll take that time and wire that time into this one as well. And I'll wire this into here. And maybe I'll set this one to be a different number, 2. And I've got a sine here. I'll take that and I'll change that to 0.6. And then I'll put another multiply in through here. And you can see I'm getting some really good random flashing going on. Okay, the sine by itself can start to look repetitious because of the way that it functions. But what I can do is I can go in and say, look, let's take that over there. We'll take this and put this up here. I can put 2 different strings on here that have 2 different values. I've got 2 different sines, and I'm multiplying them together to get this really good flashing going on into here. And I end up with this nice, really nice flashing setup going on. It's completely random. It's some bright, some light, and it's doing a really good job of flickering. And what I need to make sure that I'm doing when I'm setting up something like that is I need to make sure that it matches the flames that I have. Okay. Now, what I need to, if I look at this one, that looks really good. I'm getting a really nice random flashing going on. However, if I look at my flames are they're kind of, you know, creating and tumbling and coming up, and I'm not really getting, if you see them side by side, you go, that's not flashing like this. This is a little bit much. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in here and I'm going to set that back to 1, and I'm going to take this one over here and I'm going to set this one maybe to 0.85. Again, I want to make sure that the numbers are different, but I'm looking for, when I see them side by side, I'm looking for the same kind of flashing and tumbling out of this one that I see up in through here, because that's kind of the way I want that one set up. Nice. All right. So I've saved that up, and I'll go ahead and close that. Now, what I've also got is I have a different flicker set up. Okay. And I'm going to do the same thing here, and we'll pull those things down. And I want different numbers on these because of the way that this is going to work. Okay. I'm going to wire that into here. And I think what I'm going to do on this one is I'm going to set this one up here to be less than 1. So I'll go 0.7 on that one. And I'll take this one down over here, and we'll go, I'll leave that one at 1, I guess. And then I'll take this sign up here, and that's set to 0.9. I'll take that to 0.55, and I'm just making numbers up here. And I'll take this one, and we'll set this one at 0.75. And what we'll do is we'll back all of these up. And we'll add a multiply in there. Remember, you can only do 2 at a time. So I'm going to have to use multiplies if I'm going to be doing this. And then we'll wire that into there. And I'm getting flickering. Again, I'm just visually sort of looking between the two and assuring that I get the same flickering effect out of that one that I'm getting out of this one. Now, why am I doing 2 of them? Let me save that up. Why is it that I've done 2 of them? Because this is one of those instances where I have 2 lights in my scene. I've got that point light and I have the other point light. Both of them are containing these flickers. If I had them both with the same flicker material, I would get the exact same flickering out of both of them. But what I want is that and really rightly so, the flickering down here on the bottom would be different than the flickering up here on the top. Not to mention the fact that down here, what this is really doing is it's lighting up the floor. This is making it look like there's fire underneath the logs. And I'm getting a completely different set of flickering from those flames down there than I would be getting off of these flames up here. These flames are the ones that are really giving me that, the 2 in combination together are giving me double flickers out over here on the ground. And it's a really kind of a nice feel. So it's a nice way to finish off something like this when you need to have flickering lights. That's a quick and easy way to do it. So you can set something up. You can either do a basic or you can go in and do what I've done, which is set up a much more complicated. It's twice as complicated than it was, but then I get that better random flickering out of my sign. That's not a regular material, by the way, just so you know, when you're creating this. If you're going to be adding it in as a light function, then your material has to be set up from the start as a light function. This is not a surface, this is a light function. So you're going to select that first and foremost, and then all of the other information down here goes away because it's not opaque and it's not transparent and it's not translucent, it's not any of those things. And at default lighting, there is no default lighting on something. This is a light. So all of these choices go away, but it is now usable as a light function. So I can go in and set it up that way. I don't control color or any of that stuff. If I want to control the color on that one, then basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back over to here and change the color of the light, which I've done. So I've got one light is set to be this color. Maybe I'll make it a little bit more yellow, like that. And then my other light down over here, I'll click on that one, and that one might want to be a little bit brighter because it's near the top. And let me go back to that first one down over in there and click on that. I think I'm going to take that back to be a little bit more orange and goldy. That's going to be on the bottom down here. So I'm going to get, this is my deeper, darker color, and then I've got the other one up on top of here that's doing the heavier work. But they're both giving me multiple flashes, and they're not flashing uniformly. I've also set my attenuation so the light only goes out so far. You can light up an entire room like that, but this is an area that's 4,400 square. So I don't really want to light up the entire thing. You also might want to, if you're dealing with the texture, this is the base texture. What I did was I went back and I took the cobblestones and I created a dry cobblestone, and I have turned off the metallic and the specular on that. So, because this is not wet ground, okay? But the stones, to a certain extent, would be slightly shiny, because if they've been walked on a lot, you're going to get a little bit of shininess to them. So if I go back and set that to be just a little bit glossy, just a little, and we'll save that up, you'll see how it changes the scene. Now I'm getting a little bit more of a glow off those rocks, and that might even be a little too much. I think you can't see it, but I'm gonna change that down to 0.1 and then do that. I just want a little tiny bit of glow off those rocks, or glossiness off those rocks. It should pick up a little bit of that, but not a whole lot. I don't want it to look wet. I just want it to look like the rocks were kind of shiny or polished to begin with. And you got this nice scene. All right, so that's it. That's what we're going to show you for this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do one more short video. This does not have a sky dome in there. It does have a moon up in the sky. It does not have a sky dome in here. I'm going to show you how to set up a scene where you remove the sky dome and then build a new one and put it in.